This is Steve with Fpweb.net, and in this video we're going to do things a little differently. Today we're going to be discussing IIS Bindings. Now you'll see in newer versions of Windows Server 2012 R2 you're going to have the Start button, but you might not have that, so you can go ahead and find your way to IIS. I'm just going to hit the Windows key here. Type in IIS, and I'm going to launch IIS 7.5 because I'm on the newer version of Server. You can see 6.0 is just below it, but we're not going to be using that for our demonstration. So we'll expand our tree out. We'll find that we've got our sites just below here. This is all the sites that are currently running on the server that we're working on. And you'll see we have our support team.onfpweb.net, which is our public site that we'll be discussing today. We'll go ahead and right click that and go down to Edit Bindings. And we'll see that we have our host name, our port number, and our IP address. These are the three main things you're going to have on every binding for a website. You can see our current IP address that's assigned there, and our host header. Now what you can do is you only need two of these three items to actually make a website run. So you see we have our inside address, so if we want to know what our outside address is, we're going to do an Nslookup, and then the site name, which is going to be supportteam.onfpweb.net. Let's go ahead and type that in. Now, Nslookup, default record it's going to locate is an A record, which is what's needed to translate your URL into the public IP address that loads the site on the server. So you'll see that our IP address is going to be that 204.144.120.83 for our site, which is natted to our inside address, which is set up in the binding. Let's go ahead and close this out. Now I've got a browser opened up outside of the server here. That way we're not doing local redirection. We'll type the address in for the site that we're trying to load. I'm going to go ahead and sign in with my cached credentials in my admin account. And you'll see that the site's going to load. So we've got all three fields are filled out on the server for the binding, and the page will load. Now if we go back to the server and we remove that host name, take the host header out of it, we're still going to have two of our fields. We're going to have our IP address and our port number. Let's go ahead and save that, and then we'll go back to the site, again off the server. I'm going to actually open up an incognito window, that way we've got no cached content. It'll be a completely clean window. It'll reload it from scratch. And our site's going to come right back up. Of course I do have to authenticate again since we've got it cleared cache. Here comes our site, still working without the host header entry in the binding. Let's go back to the server. Let's open our binding back up again on there. Let's modify this even further. Go back to edit. This time let's go ahead and remove the IP address. We'll go ahead and just put that on all unassigned. That means no matter what request comes in, any IP address on the computer will work, but take a look at what we've got here. That binding is already assigned to another site. Can't have any IP address on port 80 come in. Let's find out why. So we'll go up to all the sites, and we see that the default website's also set up to work on any IP address on port 80. You can't have both running at the same time. There has to be a difference between all sites that are running, which is why you typically have multiple IP addresses for multiple sites. Now what we'll do instead is we'll go back to our support team.onfpweb.net site, we'll go back to our bindings, and let's go ahead and edit this again. Put our host name back in. It's our site URL. Remove it to all unassigned, so we have any IP address port 80 with that host name. When the request comes in, we'll see the page will still load even though we've only got two of those entries filled out. So what's happening is the request comes in through DNS to the server. The server says, yes, that's me. It sees the request for the site name. It says you're requesting on port 80, default port for HTTP, which is what the site will load as. And it says I can serve that request to you. I'm going to load the content that's on this server that's under that binding. and our page loads right up. You see Joe there. Now let's go back to the server. We'll go back to our site. Go back to our binding again. Let's do one more thing. Let's get this open. Let's take the host name out. Let's leave it on all unassigned, and let's change the port number to something else entirely. It should work. We've got no other ports being used other than 80 default HTTP and 443 for SSL. Let's use 1010. So we've got the site should come in, request any IP address on port 1010, should load our content that's loaded in the virtual directory for that. Now if you try to load it, by default again it's going to attempt to load by HTTP, which is port 80. So you have to specify the port number. So we'll put port 1010 behind our site name and attempt to load it. Now what we'll see is the site is not going to load, and there's a reason behind this. There's two reasons behind this. First being, we don't have that port open behind the firewall. Something you'll have to consider when you're working on this is to make sure that any requests that are coming in have to be allowed through any sort of firewall hardware or software that you've got set up. Second being, when you add another application on top of it, such as SharePoint, SharePoint's sites are built through the web application on a specific port number. And if alternate access mappings isn't set up to allow the site on a specific port, it's not going to recognize the application that you're attempting to load. Now we can take a look at that here real quick. If we go back to our server and open Central Admin, which is only available on the server, and to locate alternate access mappings, we'll go into our application management, and then we'll click on configure alternate access mappings. And we do have to specify the collection that we're looking at. Let's go over here, let's choose the site we've been working on this whole time, and there's our current alternate access mappings. These are the current mappings that the site's allowed to load from. So we'll add an internal URL. Go ahead and put our public IP address with the port number. Let's see, we've got our binding under the default, under the internet zone. Let's try to reload the page. And our site is loaded. Now I hope this gave you a better understanding of IIS bindings. Just remember those three components: the IP address, the host header, and the port number. And at any point in time you need at least two of those in order for the site to load properly. And remember, if you have an application that's created on a specific port, such as SharePoint, it has to be configured to listen on that port as well, or the site won't load, just as we saw. As always, thanks for watching, and if you have any questions, always feel free to reach out to Fpweb.net for any assistance. Thank you.